Rose subscribed to the church's teachings that sex was permissible only for making babies, not for intimacy, and certainly not for pleasure. After having Teddy, her ninth and last child, in February 1932, Rose told Joe she would never have sex with him again. "This idea of yours, that there is no romance outside procreation, is simply wrong," Joe said. "It was not part of our contract at the altar. The priest never said that, and the books don't argue that." Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. Today we're going to keep going in Ask Not by Maureen Callahan. And we're coming to a close here. We're almost done. I think we've got 4 more stories left to go. The story we're reading about today is Rose Kennedy, and it follows logically that we would, because the last time we talked, we were talking about Kit Kennedy, who was disowned by her mother for marrying a Protestant. What in the world? And we also, before that, talked about Rosemary Kennedy, who was born with some developmental delays and never fit in the Kennedy family, and then, of course, fell to the fate of her father, who decided that she needed to be lobotomized, and it was a botched lobotomy, and it ruined the rest of her life. So what was going on with the mom who presided over both of these scenarios? And that's who we're going to read about today. With the story of Rose, I feel like Rose, we need our own book for Rose. Not that I'm necessarily willing to plunge into those deep and dark waters at this time. But she, to me, is a very complicated character because she had like a bajillion kids. It seems like she was extremely stressed out by being a mother because it doesn't seem like she had the capacity to really love them. It seemed like she had the capacity to raise them to a standard, but not necessarily to nurture them and to be maternal. There's so many stories, at least in this book, of Rose just being very cold towards the kids. Towards Jack, who was often sick, towards Rosemary, who had challenges, towards Kik, who dated a Protestant boy and then married a Protestant boy. And it's so many of these things that she seems cold towards her children for are either not a big deal or completely out of the child's control. A sick child is not a child who needs to be shoved away. That child needs to be cared for and nurtured. So it's a little bit annoying. But, you guys, that clamp handle is driving me crazy. I don't know. The flickering light's bothering me. Excuse me while I blow it out real quick. It seemed like it'd be cozy, but I take it back. It's just in my eyes and I can't handle it. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started with Rose, and let's see what this author has to say about Rose. Now, of course, we saw some fairly glaring plot holes in the story about Rosemary, so I don't know where we're going to go about Rose. I will tell you that at the end, when I'm done with this book, in the wrap-up episode that I do, we will be discussing my final thoughts about this particular book, and I cannot say that they will be glowing. Okay, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. Let me just preface this by saying this is wholly inadequate. There's like 4 pages on her. Now, for somebody who was so persistently, seemingly, to be a failure to all of these children, you think that the author would want to say more about it. But unfortunately, the thesis of this book is men are terrible, particularly Kennedy men, and no woman could come under their gaze without leaving it maimed. And I think that if that is what your premise is, then it doesn't leave it very much room for you to tell the truth about the women who also had some scathing glances of their own and ruined many a life that fell into their gaze. So, I don't know. Let's see what she says about Rose Kennedy. I'm sure we'll have to fill in the pieces somewhere. Okay, but so far as this author goes, she says, the only Catholic more devout than Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy may have been the Pope. Rose's mother worshipped at the altar of the Virgin Mary, having built a permanent shrine in their home. Rose went to parochial school, where she was taught by nuns who believed that a woman's greatest accomplishment was to suffer well, also a literal teaching. The sisters wore hardware around their necks and wrists meant to inflict pain at the slightest movement. It was masochism enshrined as virtue, a lesson Rose also absorbed at home. Women suffered, men sought pleasure. Her mother spent her nights at home on her knees in prayer, while Rose's father, John Fitzgerald, the mayor of Boston, ran around town with a parade of women. This was Rose's preordained future, to be a supplicant, not the fierce intellect that she was at her core, the political animal who thrived under her father's tutelage, her father being one of the few American politicians to court the support of women, even though they couldn't yet vote. He recognized that one day they would, and until that day it was still women who ran their families and made most of the decisions about where to live, what to buy, how best to educate their children. Yet, they were nonetheless creatures of domestication, as Rose would become, A woman who would marry, have many children, be faithful to her husband, and never question what he did or with whom. That's stupid. If you've been called to be a helpmate to your spouse, which the Bible very clearly calls women to be, does not tell you to be trod under the feet of your husband. It says be a helpmate to them. Are you helping them on their journey through life to become a better person if you let them do whatever they want without you saying anything? I'm not saying become this horrible nag who's constantly like, every time he comes home. But if you never question what he's doing and he's just wandering around in pits of vice and you're just like, well, I can't say anything. Just gotta be that supportive wife. You're not being a supportive wife. Because one day you're going to go to heaven and you're going to answer for the kind of partner that you were. And you just let him wander willy-nilly into the night and you never say boo because I'm just going to be here nursing another baby. No, that's not your job. You have other things. Being a helper to your husband means other things besides just sitting there and, being somebody who can cook, clean, watch after the kids and, be in the bed when he comes home. Your job is so much bigger than that. And I don't know. To me, that's such a misreading of the Bible to say that, you just kind of have to accept everything your husband says. Like iron sharpens iron. You're both trying to help each other become a better person. I think that's one of the primary goals of marriage, which is why sometimes marriage isn't always fun because the other person's got to call you out sometimes. But if you were going to be a functional member of this partnership, you better call that person out when they're just, teetering on the edge of hell. After convent school in the Netherlands, Rose graduated from Dorchester High in Boston in 1906. She was eager for college and badly wanted to go to Wellesley, the private women's liberal arts college. Instead, her parents forced her to enroll at Sacred Heart Catholic College in Boston. Missing out on a Wellesley education would be the greatest regret of Rose's life. None of this stopped her from marrying the man her parents disapproved of, Joe Kennedy, whom she'd fallen in love with at age 16, and with whom, as she said, she never fell out of love. He, too, was the product of a political Boston family, 2 years older than Rose, and already well on his way. After Harvard, Joe was amassing an incredible fortune as a banker and stock market investor. Joe's father, PJ, and Rose's father, known as Honey Fitz, were both major figures in the Democratic Party, and sometimes rivals. Rose came to the marriage with a whiff of controversy. Her father, after serving 2 terms as Boston's mayor, was forced aside due to what came to be called the Toodles scandal. Rumor was Honey Fitz had been carrying on an affair with the cigarette girl known as Toodles Ryan. It was 1913. Rose was 24 years old and needed to be married soon. Honey Fitz's decision not to run again was ascribed in Boston's press to, quote, the petticoat element, the women in his life, his daughters mainly, who needed the chance to marry well. His scandal would not help that. And so, in 1914, Joe and Rose were married in a modest Catholic ceremony in Boston, united not just by their faith in politics, but also a mutual grudge against Protestants, WASPs, and any other group that routinely ostracized Irish Catholics. Their exclusion from Boston's polite society would fuel Joe's determination that he or one of his sons would become the first Irish Catholic American president. When it came to sex, however, Rose and Joe were at odds. Rose subscribed to the church's teachings that sex was permissible only for making babies, not for intimacy, and certainly not for pleasure. After having Teddy, her 9th and last child, in February 1932, Rose told Joe she would never have sex with him again. This idea of yours, that there is no romance outside procreation, is simply wrong, Joe said. It was not part of our contract at the altar. The priest never said that, and the books don't argue that. Yeah, so I am 1,000% not giving Joe any pass for running around. He should have tried to figure out how to help Rose have a better, more robust understanding of what sex is about. I also am like, Rose, you can't just tell your husband you're never going to sleep with him again. Like, that might not be a necessity for you. That's a necessity for him, and how are you going to have a happy home if you are refusing him something that he's genuinely coming to you and saying, like, I need this as part of my life. And for you to be like, yeah, but that's, too bad for you. We're done having kids, so I'm done. Like, we're inviting this man to run about the streets. And again, he has to make his own decisions, okay? So we're all adults here. And just because something's hard, you don't just run off and you just make your, crazy decisions. But at the same time, I can't imagine any man in any relationship when their wife's like, well, I'm done having sex with you, being like, okay, well, I guess that's my lot in life now, and then never have a wandering eye. Joe was a pig, 100%, right? 100%. It's not like he just had like this one side person that he like visited from time to time because his wife was so cold, but which I don't condone. I don't condone that, but I'm just saying, like, you could almost like give him a pass if it was like that scenario. The situation here where Joe's like literally going into his daughter's bedrooms for their friends, like, obviously the guy's got problems, you know. So Joe and all his problems needs to sit over here. But the marriage situation here with Rose being like, no, that's a recipe for disaster, friend. Your life's going to be terrible because now he's got the wandering eye and he's resentful of you and all of this. Like, what is all that drama? Callahan asks the same question I'm asking. Did Rose have it coming? Did she leave her husband no other option than to sleep with other women? And if so, did she deserve this degree of suffering? Well, no, duh. That's a stupid question. Okay, it's not a stupid question. Did you have it coming? Did she pretty much leave the door open for him to just run around? Okay, I think we've already established the fact that I think any man in that scenario would find himself in a very difficult place. But nobody does. But did she deserve this degree of suffering? No, that's a stupid question. Like, why are we wasting ink on the page to answer that dumb question? Nobody deserves to have their face grounded in their husband's affair partners. The book says that Joe stayed out night after night and constantly traveled on so-called business, even as she had baby after baby in those first years of marriage. Joe, Jack, and then Rosemary. Rosemary. Oh, the trauma of that birth. It was September 13th, 1918, a Friday, and the influenza pandemic was tearing through Boston. Rose's obstetrician was running late, attending to Boston's sick and dying, and the nurse who arrived wasn't permitted to give anesthesia. It was Rose and the nurse alone in her bedroom. As Rose's labor progressed, her pain intensifying, the baby making her way through the birth canal, Rose desperately tried not to push her, but was physically unable to. Despite the nurse yelling at her to stop, she clamped Rose's legs together and pushed the baby back inside. All this pain, Rose kept telling herself, was God's cost. First suffering, then joy. I don't know what religion Rose practiced. This is very twisted. Nurse, trained in obstetrics, could have delivered this baby. But this was yet another thing women weren't allowed to do, because that meant earning money that otherwise would have gone to the doctor. If Rose's nurse were to deliver Rose's baby, then Frederick Good, the otherwise occupied obstetrician, would not be able to bill Joe Kennedy his standard $125 fee. And so this capable nurse, upon seeing the baby crown, felt no other option but to put her palm on that tiny head and shove the baby back inside, holding her there for 2 hours. What the heck? Why? Why would you do that? I get so many comments. So many times people are saying to me, oh, you just have no idea. I can't even hardly listen to you read this book because you just are so out to lunch when it comes to how hard women had it. And you constantly are asking people to do things they weren't capable of doing. You're constantly putting up these moral dilemmas and acting like they should have chosen this one when obviously nobody could have chosen that one because it just wasn't culturally the one you chose. Okay. That's what makes people heroic. By choosing the thing that everybody else isn't doing. There is a thing that happens when you choose what is different and better and right than what everybody else is doing. Yes, the nurse was probably afraid of what the doctor would do when he came and found that the baby had been born in his absence. But is the doctor stupid? Doesn't he realize that the female body is going to expel that baby when the time comes? And it's not like you can plan it. If you could just be like, okay, I'm not ready to have the baby yet. Hold it in. You mean, that's not how that works. And the doctor would have realized that. And if he's, gallivanting through the streets trying to help all the sick and dying of Boston during a, influenza pandemic, is this man some kind of like cruel, evil fiend that he would hold it over you that he wasn't able to collect his $125? I'm pretty sure he got paid that night by attending to all the sick and dying. Is it better that you would make a woman suffer for 2 hours? I'm struggling to understand any human being who could have the strength to hold a baby and another human being for 2 hours. The woman is screaming, the baby's trying to come out, and you're standing there doing that for 2 hours. Like, I just feel like we're missing part of the story because I don't think any cultural context would allow you to care so much that the doctor gets paid that you are willing to stand there for 2 solid hours holding a baby inside of a woman. Wouldn't at some point you just be like, this is stupid. Let's deliver this baby. Who's going to stand there for that long? What was happening? What kind of a man was this doctor that they all lived in fear that he wouldn't get his $125? I just don't, something does not make sense in that story. And if the author is trying to say that's how it was when you were a woman back then, you just did not question the men. You just never did it. Okay, well, if that's the case, then let's have a little heroism, okay? Let's decide to defy the doctor to deliver the baby and let this lady be in peace. See, so enough already of me telling you just don't understand how it was for women. I get it was hard for women. That's why you have to have outliers in society who are willing to do things that other people wouldn't do, and that's what raises you to new heights. That you are able to say, everybody does this. This is wrong. In this scenario, I'm going to choose something different, something better, something that is going to help flourish humankind over here in this scenario. Don't come to me telling me that I don't understand. I do understand. That's my point, that it is hard, but sometimes you have to have people that come forward and do the right thing despite the fact that everybody else is telling you you don't have to. Okay, enough of that. When Rosemary didn't make her milestones, when her little sister Kik, 18 months younger, began outpacing her, Rose and Joe knew that something was very wrong. The perfectionists in them were loath to admit it, raising their ever-growing family with militaristic fervor. The children were weighed every day and kept trim and athletic, quizzed on economics, geopolitics, world religions, taught to ski, sail, and swim, each child's progress detailed on index cards with only one outcome acceptable. "We only have winners in this family," Joe and Rose would say. "We don't allow losers."
Our goals: hit dingers, disgrace the pitcher's family, make the other players cry, and stomp their butts into the ground.
Rosemary was slow, but Kik especially doted on her. In some ways, it assuaged her guilt. Kik was really the second oldest daughter, but because Rosemary was, defective? Was Rosemary to her parents a loser? Kik had been elevated, treated as the true oldest daughter, afforded the respect of her father and brothers. Jack and Joe Jr. especially treated Kik not just as a peer, but as a star that she was. She had heard the admiring whispers about the three of them, that of all the Kennedy siblings, they were the ones. A closed VIP circle glowing within an already shining constellation. And Kik had been dutiful, hadn't she? Not only that, but Kik was the only child who had stood up for her mother, defending her against Joe Jr. and Jack. It was Kik alone who told them that they were callous, that they ought to sympathize with their mother and the brutality she endured. Oh, how her brothers would laugh and make fun, mocking their mother behind her back for the way their father cheated on her, flaunting his infidelity. Joe would bring his lovers home, parade them around the front porch, taking them sailing. Jack, at 12, had actually plunged off the side of a boat once when he realized that his dad and movie star girlfriend were having sex on board. Joe had his paramours over to family dinners, seated at the table like any other guest. Well, of course the boys had no respect for their mother. That's what happens in homes where the dad doesn't respect the mother. The boys grow up and they're just as disrespectful and rude and hateful to their mother. If a father does not respect his mother, it completely deteriorates the mother-love bond. I mean, there are some temperaments, some boys who see what the dad is doing and they despise the dad for it. And they don't take on what the dad's doing. But then there's other temperaments too. And I think you see this a lot, especially as a boy is coming of age and he's living in a home where the dad is disrespectful of the mother, where he tries that on for size. Is that a way to be? Is that how I be a man? Is that by being disrespectful to my mother? Is that a thing? Coincidentally, it was Kik whom her mother had been pregnant with the first and only time she left Joe. So fed up with his women, his lies, his utter disregard for their marriage, Rose had packed up her things, left her 3 children behind, and gone back to her childhood home on Wells Avenue in Boston, where she slept in her old bed and took solace in the company of her siblings and her beloved father, and tried to make sense of what had happened to her young, once glittering future. She had been the belle of Boston Irish society, and now she was relegated to the metaphorical back room. Rose had gifts, not least her smarts, her high organizational skills, and her energy, but these had been dimmed by the men in her life. First, her father, whose insistence on a Catholic college over Wellesley was not about Rose's best interests at all, but, as she would later learn, political expediency. The great feminist mayor of Boston had sold out his daughter after he was warned by the Archbishop, no less, that he would lose the Catholic vote if he allowed Rose a secular liberal education. As for that Catholic education, well, Rose had been taught that a woman's highest and truest calling was motherhood. She was promised total fulfillment in that role, assured that all of one's creativity and intellectualism would, if channeled properly into her husband and children, be satisfied. The most beautiful station of her life, Rose was told. But it wasn't, not even close. Her husband, whom she loved deeply, whose nimble, capacious mind she adored and wanted access to, shut her out. He wouldn't tell her where he was or what he was doing. He kept a suite at the Ritz in Boston and another in the Waldorf in Manhattan, while she was shut up in the suburbs. She, every bit as urbane and sophisticated as Joe, had been left to atrophy. It was as if she were an object he had thoughtlessly left behind, the way one would realize while traveling they must have left their hat somewhere and, oh well. Rose needed something other than babies and paid bills to feel fulfilled. She wanted to be around interesting people and things, the theater and corporate boardrooms and political campaigns. She'd so much to offer, but Joe wouldn't share anything of his political maneuverings with Rose. Not his strategies or his enemies, his fears or his goals. Did he really think so little of her? Of the children he left her with? It wasn't just Rosemary who concerned her. Little Jack was a very sick toddler. He had been ill with scarlet fever when she left Joe, and that's how desperate she was. She left poor Jack with the nannies to save herself. It was the winter of 1920. Women had just won the right to vote. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, wife and daughter to two political geniuses, had never felt so powerless. That is pretty desperate if your poor little child is over there on death's door with scarlet fever and you're like, I just got to get out of here. And I don't even blame her, not wholly, because if you think about how long she had put up with Joe and his ways, and you had somebody to look after the child, maybe you would have just needed a break to just get your mental faculties in place before you met a new onslaught. Sort of like, I need some space to figure out what I'm supposed to do here. Teaching that motherhood is your highest calling in life. I feel like there's nothing we can say is the highest calling in one's life because every single person is made as such an individual. So God has a plan for each one of us. And some of us, our highest calling is to be a mother. And others, it's to do other things in the world. I think that it's completely wrong to act like one path is superior to the other because both paths have exactly what you're supposed to get out of life for you to be the best person that you could be. But with that being said, though, I also feel like motherhood has been so horribly maligned as something that, you can't be a fulfilled person. You're over here just you have to constantly figure out how to help all these needy people. And, when are you going to have yours? And when are all the eyes going to be on you because you're so smart? You have so much to give in this world. And when is it going to be about you? And when does the whole world get to see how smart and wonderful and lovely and beautiful and amazing you are? Well, your family's never going to be able to tell you that. You're just slogging day in and day out for an unworthy crowd of people, a bunch of ingrates who constantly are looking to you to be the answer to everything. You got to wash all their clothes and feed them and discipline them. And you're constantly trying to figure out what to make for dinner. Aren't you made for more than that? Of course you are. Of course you are. You need to go out and work like a dog somewhere, okay? Just go out and find your passion in a cubicle, all right? That is where life is, because at least your boss will tell you thank you sometimes, and you might get, some monetary benefits for all of your hard work. No one's going to say boo to you at home. And so we in our efforts to define the fact that motherhood isn't the only thing a woman can do, we've then maligned motherhood in order to elevate this other thing called having a career. I think the great lie is that you can do both successfully. That's the great lie. It's not that, motherhood's the best thing and these other people over here who have to have a career, how sad for them. Or you can have a career and be like, this big boss babe, don't be a mom. It's like, yuck, diapers. Both of those things are wonderful vocations to commit your life to, if that's the path you're supposed to go. But we don't need to malign one or the other in an effort to say, go out and be the best person that you can be in the role that God has given you in the generation that you have been born in. Why are we constantly trying to malign one or the other? Everybody's an individual. But I feel sorry for Rose that she felt so let down, because if the nuns had told you that your highest calling was to have a ton of kids and to be a wife, and then you're married to somebody who always ostracizes you, who never lets you into his inner circle, who's constantly like, I'm not coming to you with any of this stuff. This is my man's world, and I'm not going to tell you what's going on with my job, and I'm not going to tell you what's going on with my colleagues, and I'm not going to tell you anything that's happening in my actual life. I'm not going to seek your opinion. Very smart person, but I'm not going to tell you what my political strategies are. It's wasted on you. That'd be so, so lonely, because the reason that marriage could make you happy when you do have so many demands on yourself is that you're doing it with somebody who cares about you, who sees you and wants to do life with you, and who's like your ride or die. If you're trying to have all these kids and your spouse is like out to lunch 100% of the time, that wouldn't fulfill anyway. But that's not what the nuns were saying was going to fulfill her. Yet they did not articulate well to her what a healthy marriage looks like, plus the demands of a family. You can handle all the demands of the family if you and your spouse are like this about everything, right? It's still challenging. Having a family is hard. It's challenging. But it's impossible to be happy if the person you're doing it with is like, he's out. Okay, I've got to go downtown. I'm meeting somebody at my suite at the Ritz. I'm meeting somebody at the Waldorf Hotel. Like, you got this, right? Okay, well, if not, the nannies have it. Just don't bug me. That's what she was reacting to. It's not motherhood she's reacting to. It's the abandonment of a spouse who promised to love you. So she runs off to her childhood home. But it was to prove no haven. Rose's 20-year-old sister Eunice, her favorite sibling, was dying of tuberculosis. Their father was consumed with Eunice's care, and there was no room for Rose's pain in this house. There was no room for Rose. Her father came to her childhood bedroom one night, snow falling outside, and told her to deal with her problems alone. He had never liked Joe Kennedy anyway. He had tried to talk her out of marrying him. But Rose just had to defy her father. Wayward girls got their comeuppance. "You've made your commitment, Rosie," he told her. "You must honor it now. What is past is past. The old days are gone. Your children need you, and your husband needs you." "But what about Rose's needs?" "You can make things work," her father said. "I know you can. If you need more help in the household, then get it. If you need a bigger house, ask for it. If you need more private time for yourself, take it. There isn't anything you can't do once you set your mind to it. So go now, Rosie. Go back to where you belong." Did her father know what or who was waiting for her back home? Rose's husband wasn't just promiscuous. He wasn't just an adulterer. He was also, according to Gloria Swanson, a Hollywood star and Joe's longtime mistress, a rapist. Of their initial encounter in 1927, Swanson said that Joe Kennedy came to her hotel suite in Palm Beach, entered with total force, and she said, moved so quickly that his mouth was on mine before either of us could speak. With one hand he held the back of my head, and with the other... Anyway, he helped himself to her, I will say that. She says that he was like a roped horse, rough, arduous, racing to be free. After a hasty climax, he laid beside me, stroking my hair. Apart from his guilty, passionate mutterings, he still had said nothing cogent. I had said nothing at all, and I knew, as we lay there, that it would go on. Rose never knew about this attack, but she knew this side of Joe, the violent side, the predatory side, and it was one she chose to ignore. And that is literally all we get about Rose Kennedy. What? Disappointing is what that is. That's disappointing. There's too much to the Rose story for us to basically have talked just about Kick, have talked kind of about Joe. What about Rose? What's Rose's deal? Yeah, she tried to run away from Joe, but we need more than that, right? And this person who she has repeatedly woven into other stories as being dismissive, problematic in her own way. And then, she wants to throw Rose in there and be like, well, Rose had a hard time because of her really, really, really awful husband. Joe was awful. No one's ever going to give Joe Sr. a pass and going to be like, what a paramount of Catholic decency. No, he was a terrible person. But I also think, where's my coffee? I think that she was stubborn in the things that she believed. I think that she was insistent that these are the things that I was told by the nuns. So it's not possible the nuns had never gotten anything wrong. And I mean that by whatever her teachings were regarding sex, she was unwilling to see that there might be a different way. And I understand that. I mean, the things that we're taught about sex at a young age are very, very, very foundational to the way that we accept relationships later in life. So I do get that. I'm not saying that, she should have just flipped a switch and been able to believe something else. If she'd been taught her whole life that this act that you're supposed to say for marriage is this dirty, terrible, weird thing, and only do it when you have to so you can have kids, but then never do it again because it's gross. If that's what you'd been taught, I don't blame her for really struggling to ever have a different way of viewing it. As the person in your ear who's telling you, no, this is a good thing, this is a good thing. You're watching him run out and have the nastiest sex you've ever seen. So that's not the person you're going to trust, right? That's not the person who you're going to be like, well, it seems like he's got a really strong idea of how this is. He's a man full of vice. So the last thing you're going to do is take any of his advice on a subject that you feel very sure the nuns had right. But the other idea too, that it's always got to be hard. It's always got to be suffering. If you're not suffering, God's not happy. I think a lot of Christians think that if there's two options, the harder one is the one God wants you to take because he's going to teach you something. I've thought that numbers of times in my life. If this is the harder thing, it's because God's trying to shape my character. Sometimes he does need to shape our character through hard things. But also he's a father who loves to give good gifts to his children. Did Jesus himself not say, what child would ask for a fish and you give him a snake? What child asks for a piece of bread and you give him a stone? If earthly fathers in all their sin know how to give good gifts to their children, how much more does your heavenly Father know how to give to you? So this idea that God's always trying to make life hard for you to have a teachable moment, that's just not the character of God. And yeah, there are hard things. Like any parent out there, sometimes we have to make our kids do things they don't want to do because we know in the end it'll shape their character. Of course. And I know that our Heavenly Father does the same, but it's not always a whip on our back. It's actually never a whip on our back because he's never cruel to us. But it's not like God's only happy with us when we're over here slogging, like wiping the tears out of our eyes, climbing yet one more mountain. And I feel like Rose was very, very indoctrinated and unable and unwilling to see other sides of things. I think that Joe, feeling that he could not have intimacy with his wife because she shut him down and was like, well, we're done having kids, so I'm done with you. That makes perfect sense why he would also not come to her with his work stuff. What's he going to sit there at the kitchen table for and tell her about his work and all about his strategies and all of this if she's already shut him down in what he felt like was the most integral part of their marriage, the sexual element of it. And, it's like, well, if you're not going to share that with me, then I really don't want to come and talk to you about anything. Because I don't want to just be met on one side here and you get to have all these rules about how we function as a couple, but the things that matter to me don't matter to you. So just whatever. You handle the kids and you do your thing. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do my thing. Joe was a pig. Nothing that I'm saying is saying that Joe wasn't a pig. I'm just saying that Rose doesn't seem like she was especially easy to be married to because it seems like she came into the marriage with a lot of very, very dogmatic views on things. And her personality seems like she was very organized and she was very able to help him form the family culture that he wanted with a whole bunch of perfectionists. So I'm sure that same sort of hard edge that it would require to get like 1,000 children in line all the time would also mean that when her husband came to her with things, she could also show him that hard edge. But obviously she was hurting. She left her husband when she was pregnant and had a really sick kid at the house to try to get some space to think. She was obviously hurting it. But I feel like she just wanted to just go back to the same sickness that she had been involved with, but with the same mindset. It's like, rather than change any of her mindset to sort of fix things, she was going to keep the mindset she had, but then just ignore. Well, that's not a recipe for further happiness. Boxing things away and pretending it's not happening, that's not a recipe to make it better. And then one other thing I wanted to say about the chapter is, what do you guys think about what her dad said as far as like, you need to go back to your husband and your kids? I honestly thought that wasn't terrible advice, given that he may not have known who Joe was. Now, I think that if he had more of an understanding of what it was exactly that Rose was married to or who Rose was married to, maybe he wouldn't have been like, well, just go back. But at the same time, if you aren't willing to leave your husband, you can't just abandon your kids to the nannies and then go hang out at your childhood home and just like try to turn time back and go back to where it was safe. I understand the appeal of that. I understand wanting to pretend that that's a possibility, but it's not a possibility. And so for her father to just be like, you have to go back. You have to go back to your children. You have to go back to your husband. If you need things, ask for them. If you need a bigger house, if you need more help with the stuff, like they had so much money. It wasn't a money problem. It's just, you need to know, you need to decide what you need, and then you need to tell your husband what it is that you need. But you can't come back home and try to rewind the clock back. Maureen Callahan almost makes it seem as though her dad was so cold to her, but what other advice was he supposed to give her? Again, remembering that he may not have realized all the things that Joe was doing, but also he may have realized what Joe was doing, and he had also run around with a lot of women himself. So maybe he really didn't think that that was that big of a deal. Unless Rose had come to him and said, here's my plan for getting out of my marriage. But it doesn't sound like she had a plan. It just sounds like she wanted to hide. And again, I completely sympathize with the desire of trying to find a safe place again. But I think given the situation, given the cultural moment, I don't think that the father's advice was necessarily completely wrong. I think the fact that he's telling her to advocate for herself and to make sure that she's getting what she needs, and if she needs more alone time, then ask for it and get it. I honestly think it's a little ahead of the times. I think that's a little bit ahead of what other people would have told her to do in that scenario. I think other people may have just told her to suck it up and be quiet. And even if it's hard all the time, it just has to be hard. That's not what her dad was saying. Her dad was saying, say what you need and get what you need. And I think he stopped short of saying this, but I think to finish that conversation, it would have been, and you need to say what you need your husband not to be doing, and he needs to not be running around. So to circle things back to the beginning of the conversation, if we are to be helpmates to our spouses, sitting around and letting them fall to their greatest vices and just being like, well, that's just my lot in life. That's just who he is. Yeah, it might be who he is. And maybe you need to decide that you aren't willing to put up with that anymore. And maybe you need to be willing to say some things about it. Maybe you need to be willing to sit down and have the hard conversations. But being victimized by something that you refuse to address with your spouse is ridiculous. Anyway, this was a bit of a meandering episode. There just wasn't much to it. You guys, I was disappointed. Are you guys disappointed? That was like the most disappointing chapter of all time. Maybe next time will be better. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the comments. Tell me everything you think about this. Bye.